I want to welcome everybody to Michael's. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Mic levels are good. As Alwyn mentioned, we are streaming live today. We've done it a couple times, I believe a few times with me as the subject, a few times with other guest presenters. But today is sort of our official rollout of our Michael's mobile production unit. So if everybody takes a little look behind them, you can see Scarlett and David are at the back of the room, and there's this big fancy road case. And in the live feed, you're looking over Scarlett's shoulder here at the system. So it's kind of exciting for us to have been able to build a little television studio on wheels. And we're ironing out a few bugs. This is the first official use of the mobile production unit. And we're going to learn more. And as we become experts in our own field and start broadcasting more and more of our seminars, including today's Going Wide, Introduction to Panoramic Photography, we're hoping to have more guest presenters in, more interviews, and then of course we want to take it on the road. It's got wheels for a reason. We can drive it. So that's all very exciting. Of course, today's seminar, Going Wide. As Alwyn alluded to in his introduction, I'm kind of into panos. So let's just start off here. Obviously, there's me taking a panorama. You can see me on the roof of a big building in Perth. It's actually a council house. And we've got a tall panoramic tripod and a full, multi-row panoramic head. I've got one here to show you as well. And you can see there was the resulting picture. Now, what we try to achieve in our panoramic work with mosaics of pictures, and we're going to talk about a lot of the history of everything, but at the end of the day, the modern panoramic photographer is probably shooting digital and is building a mosaic of multiple frames. And sometimes the cameras are automatically assembling them, and sometimes we're assembling them with software. And we'll dive into that as well. But our mission is to try to create something that we couldn't have before. Maybe it's a wider field of view. Oh, we'll get back to this one. Or maybe it's just to try to create a cohesive image. So in this case, I think there was something like 36 across by 4 images high. So there's over 100 frames in there. But the image needs to survive as a cohesive picture. You don't want to see all the artifacts of stitching and everything, and that's what makes it quite tricky. So that's really, sort of in a nutshell what our title slide's sort of showing us. Now, let's just get a little bit about me. We won't dwell on it, but photography is not actually my original profession. I spent 15 years in the explosive testing industry, but luckily, the world of explosives testing involves a lot of photography, but it's mostly scientific photography, so it's a little bit different than what I'm doing now. Some of my work's even lightly classified as artistic, if you see the big print on the easel over here. Then I spent about 15 years as a commercial photographer, but since the start of all this, ever since I pretty well put a half-decent film camera in my hand, maybe 25 years ago, I've been a bit of a panorama junkie. And I'm just addicted to it. It's a very fun thing to shoot the panorama because it's a little technical, and I've always got a bit of a technical background to me, and you can kind of show things that have not been shown before with panoramas. So now, there we go. We keep talking about panoramas. What is a panorama? Well, it's a little bit of a tough one. There's a lot of different definitions, but for most people, it's a picture that's about 2 units wide, 1 unit high. However, there's exceptions to this because, of course, it could be 2 units high, 1 unit wide. You can also take a conventional picture, which might be 6 units wide, 4 units high, standard 4x6 inch print, and you could crop that and call it a panorama as well. And of course, there's been many, many cameras that were made in the film days that had these panoramic shooting modes, and all they did was just black out the top and bottom of the negative, and that was your panorama. So it's not really a hard definition. So that covers our sort of aspect ratio, and of course you can make them as wide as you want, but that sort of is the demarcation zone. Once it's 2 to 1, it's usually referred to as a panorama. Then of course, it could be a mosaic of many images. Even if it was square, that still could be classified as a panorama because it's a mosaic. And of course, there are special panoramic cameras. And some of them shoot square images, some of them shoot 6x17 images. There's all sorts of weird types of panoramic cameras that can do these things. So that brings us to the obvious question, why would we want a panorama? Well, right off the bat, it's a pleasing image format. These wider images look quite nice. However, there's a square panorama right beside you, so they don't really have to be wide. It's still a panorama because it's presenting this ultra-wide field of view, and it's a mosaic of many images. So again, that gets us to our second point. We want to show a wider field of view. Well, here's a classic case. Maybe we've got our crop sensor camera, an affordable camera like a 80D, a Canon 80D. I've got one over there. And we have a 50 mil prime lens on there, the nifty 50. Well, that's actually like an 80 mil lens when it's hooked up to our cropped sensor camera, so that's not very wide at all. But if we want to shoot a wider image, and that's the camera we've got with us today, well, let's shoot a couple images across. And there we are. We've managed to take this 50 mil or 80 mil equivalent lens and get a little wider aspect ratio, a little wider field of view with the tool we've got. So, it's a common issue. Third point, to yield more detail using many images. Well, when I first started out, digital cameras only had about 1 or 2 megapixels. That wasn't a lot of resolution. Most of our screens on our smartphones have got more than a megapixel worth of resolution on them. And of course, our 8K television sets, are like a 4 megapixel frame, or 4K televisions like a 6 megapixel frame. The highest resolution digital SLRs are in the 40 to 50 megapixel range. We've got medium format digital cameras that are in the 50 to 100 megapixel range. But even with a basic camera like a 10 megapixel, an older camera, you want to put together a quick mosaic of 20 or 30 frames, you're up there at the modern medium format resolution, and you didn't have to spend all the money. So it's a very convenient way, assuming you've got the right topic that needs higher resolution, for you to build a mosaic and get that kind of resolution. And then of course, if you use a modern camera that's got obscene resolution like a 50 megapixel Fuji GFX, you can start making, 1,000 megapixel images very quickly with a mosaic of those. Then the last reason we might want a panorama is to show a huge space. And of course, this is where it gets a little freaky, even behind the camera. Because of course, we can make spherical panoramas. That's where we put the camera maybe in the middle of the room, and we rotate the camera all the way around itself, and we shoot the complete 360-degree width by full 180-degree height. And of course, that sample that's on the easel beside us here, that's exactly how that was shot. As a matter of fact, it was shot with the lens that's sitting on the tripod right in front of you. In that case, it was shot with a full-frame Canon 5D Mark III. I currently have a cropped sensor Canon 80D on that. But it can be used again. It's just depending on what focal length you want to use for your lens and what is the effective focal length, how many pictures you need to shoot around. But even with the Canon 80D, with the Canon 8 to 15 mil zoom that we've got over there, you can shoot a full sphere in 4 frames. And I'll demonstrate in a little while exactly how that works. So that sort of gives us, our reasons for the panorama. So let's just dive into, what do we need to shoot one? Well, as I was describing earlier, you can basically shoot it with any camera. It's been a very, very popular format from the beginning of the photographic age. So before they even had specific panoramic cameras, there were people using still cameras to shoot panoramas and building mosaics. Now, they didn't have software to stitch it together, they just presented the images. And as far back as 1848, there was the famous Cincinnati Panorama. And I'll just bring this up full screen over here. And this, I'll put this link in our once we get the speech online. Oh, we got the Flash plugin. Oh, well, that's unfortunate. I apologize for that. Some of these older websites need Flash, but nevertheless, I think if you do have, I don't have the plugin, I don't want to put that in right now. Let's just go back here. The Cincinnati Panorama, there's a bit of a text description and there's an awful lot on this. When I share the link later, you'll figure it all out. But it was shot with a daguerreotype, which is one of the first commercially viable panoramic formats. And it was a dangerous format for the photographers to use because they developed the daguerreotype plates with mercury vapor, and many of these photographers died of mercury poisoning. So the photographers that shot this famous Cincinnati Panorama did it on 8-inch daguerreotype plates, which were massive. This would have been the Rolls-Royce of cameras in its day. And it was I think it was a 6-plate panorama, and it's on display in the Cincinnati Public Library. I'd like to go see it one of these days. And And it had an immense amount of detail because these were really big daguerreotype plates. Inherently, or normally, most of the daguerreotype shooters were shooting these little, they were just a couple inches maximum size, and they had a lot of detail in them. It was a very, very interesting format. There's still a few people using these ancient formats just as for fine art purposes. But the Cincinnati Panorama was digitized by Rochester Institute of Technology with a microscope system. So they basically took all the individual plates and scanned them with a microscope and then put all the individual scans together as a huge mosaic, and it became a panorama of a panorama. And they put it together digitally, and unfortunately, because I don't have the flash player here, can't really show it to you right now, but you can play with it at home. The amount of detail in that old 1848 pano is incredible. There's so much detail, they were able to read all of the names of the various paddle wheelers that were on the Ohio River at the time. They were able to match those names to the log books of the various captains, figure out what day of the year all those ships were in Cincinnati. So they calculated the day the Panorama was shot because it wasn't documented. And then they were able to zoom in to a town hall tower and read the time on a clock face to the nearest minute. It was just an incredible amount of resolution. So what these guys were doing with daguerreotypes is what I am attempting to do with digital today. So that's a very interesting example. Let's go back to our slide here and get on to our next topics here. So there you go. People were shooting panoramas with assembly techniques from the very beginnings of the photographic age. Then, of course, there were special panoramic format cameras that were made. They were made in film, and they've been simulated in digital as well today. And, of course, nearly every smartphone and most digital digicameras have these special panoramic modes. You pick up your Android or your iPhone, and there'll be in your Photos app a sweep panoramic mode, which is just very easy. You just shoot it, and you've got yourself wide pictures. So very exciting. Now, I just want to show you one of these historical panoramic cameras here. So let's just go over to here, and this is very interesting. So on the left-hand side, we've got a Kodak circuit camera, which is a sweep camera, and as you can see, there's like a bit of a round disc below the camera. This camera rotates about the tripod, pulling the film through its clockwork mechanism and exposing the film with a slit aperture, basically walking the light across the film as it unrolls from one spool and rolls onto the next. These were amazing cameras in their day, and this fellow Reg Lambert was using this camera from the 1920s into the 1960s in Western Australia. The photographer on the right-hand side is Phil Gray, a photographer out of Sydney. He discovered Lambert's archives and traveled to Perth about 4 or 5 times in 1984 and reshot many of his locations in color with his more modern Sights 70mm circuit camera. And then, of course, the Sights company exists to this day. Now what they've done is replaced the film in these cameras with a digital line sensor. So think of it as a scanner that rotates about the scene. So they are scanning digital cameras. So these special cameras still exist to this day. They're very expensive, though. So that gives you a little bit of an indication of what the special cameras are. Now let's get back to our slideshow here. So as we said, there's a lot of ways to skin this panoramic cat. So we're talking about the historic systems. Obviously, any camera film could shoot it with multiple shots with a little bit of overlap. You could sticky tape and scissor the pictures together. I used to do that in the film days. We talked about the Cincinnati Panorama. Another interesting fact, all of the astronauts that walked on the surface of the moon had a Hasselblad square format camera on the chest of their spacesuits. And these guys shot panoramas on every mission to the moon. And they basically just stood, clicked, rotated their body, clicked, rotated their body, clicked. And all these panoramas are available online. And if you wanted to stitch them yourself, you can download the scans of the source frames from NASA and have a play with yourself, play with it on your own with any stitching software. And lo and behold, here's a website with all the panoramas from the lunar missions. And they're fascinating. Now, because of the way the astronauts rotated, the camera wasn't in the perfect stitching location. It's referred to as the no parallax point. So there's a little bit of errors, but it's a landscape panorama. And as long as there's not a lot of really discernible detail in your foreground, it's very easy just to take multiple frames, like that, and stitch them together. It's when you're close to some important subject matter that your alignment issues become a bit tricky, and that's where special panoramic heads come into play. So I just find it really, really cool that the astronauts shot panos on the moon. And luckily, due to my job here at Michaels, I had a chance to meet the last man who walked on the moon and put a panoramic camera in his hand and have him shoot a panorama of himself. And we showed him some of the Hasselblad space replica, well, not replicas, but the commemorative space cameras. And he's like, that's exactly like what I had on my spacesuit when I walked on the moon. So it was a really interesting thing to actually meet a guy who shot panos on the moon. And unfortunately, Gene Cernan passed away in January of this year. There's not too many of these guys left who walked on the moon, but they were photographers, they were trained, so they could shoot pictures while they were there. We talked a little bit about the circuit cameras. That was that old rotating camera that I was mentioning that Reg Lambert had. And of course, you know, these things were a very important type of photography in the early part of the 20th century. So the film pano cameras, they still sort of hung on, and there's still some people who are using them. So there's some really cool ones. I like this one myself. So this is a Linhof Technorama 617 camera. So this takes a roll of 120 film, and you get 4 shots on a roll. And the negatives are 6 centimeter by 17 centimeter. They're huge. So this is kind of like the ultra high res camera in panoramic format. This camera out-resolves a 50 megapixel modern digital camera. It will not out-resolve stitching from that 50 megapixel camera though. So you can still beat it. But quite an interesting camera. A lot of photographers, including Ken Duncan, famous Australian landscape photographer, shot on this format. Fuji made them, Linhof made them, there was a few other companies that made them. Some people even made handmade ones. I've been seeing some samples online of a guy who's 3D printing panoramic cameras in this format. So that was quite interesting, and they were well, I think the Technorama Linhofs are still made to this day, or at least made up until recently. Hasselblad and Fuji co-developed the X-Pan. Now this used 35 mil film and shot in its panoramic mode a 65 millimeter by 24 millimeter panoramic frame. It was a very popular camera in its day, and I believe it was manufactured up until about 2005, 2006. When they come in used, they get picked up pretty quick here at Michaels. This is from our museum. Lastly, I've got an interesting little Russian camera here. Bit of a there's a few companies that made these. The company Widelux was quite popular. We don't have a Widelux in our museum, unfortunately. This is called a Horizont by a company called Global. Now, it's a special camera because it's a swing lens. So the circuit cameras that I was describing, they rotated and the film walked across the slit as the camera rotated. These are opposite. This has a lens that swings inside it, sweeping the slit aperture across the film. So they obviously can't see behind themselves. They shoot about 140 degree to 150 degree field of view. But they're still popular to this day. I interviewed a photographer, a Melbourne photographer, who still shoots on a Widelux about a month or two ago. So quite interesting. And of course, Sights continues to make their RoundShot series cameras. They were made in the film days, and Phil Gray was shooting on one back in the 80s, and they still exist in their digital form. And I'll just quickly show you the RoundShot website here. And that is their current D3 model. And I believe that's got a linear sensor of about 9,000 or 8,000 pixels, and then you just get as many pixels as you choose to if this thing rotates. And it can shoot, depending on the lens, nearly a full sphere. So it can almost cover from ceiling to floor and do the full 180 degrees. What's really nice about these digital scanning panoramic cameras is that you don't have to assemble the picture. There's no stitching required. So they're very good for shooting in areas where there is motion. However, because they are a sweeping camera, they create what's referred to as a temporal artifact. So, as the camera sweeps, if a car is moving in line with the sweep, you will extend the length of the car, and it'll look a bit freaky. If the car is moving in the opposite direction of the sweep motion of the camera, you will shrink the length of the car. So man-made objects that have known dimensions can get a little bit distorted, and it'll be a little bit freaky when you look at the results. However, natural objects like trees swaying and waves rolling in, you'd never notice the temporal artifacts. So they're very good for nature use, but expensive and specialized. I've never used one personally. Matter of fact, I don't think I've ever even seen one. I don't know of anybody who even has one in Melbourne, but they exist. So let's get back here to our slides. So now, modern panoramic cameras in the digital age. As I was explaining, there are sweeping digital cameras, digital circuit cameras, like that Sights Roundshot that I just showed you. There are the special panoramic modes on almost new cameras. Your iPhone, your Android phone, it actually uses a video mode when you're shooting a panorama, and it's taking a whole bunch of tiny little slices and blending them together in real time. So again, as you sweep your iPhone shooting a panorama, you can get some very weird artifacts as your cat moves through the scene and you turn your cat into what looks like a centipede. You'll see all these panoramic fails on the photo sites all the time. And then of course, there's the system I use, which is shoot and stitch. And lastly, and this has just changed since the last time I gave this presentation in October 2014, OneShot panoramic cameras have showed up in the marketplace. And they've changed everything, and I love them. They're really, really exciting. So let's dive into that. OneShot panoramic cameras, as far as I'm concerned, this is where all the action is in the market. So many players have entered this market. But this is where they sort of started. I'll just sort of quickly run over here. This is a OneShot panoramic camera, but it's referred to as a mirror-based camera. So these were the simplest to make. And when the early digital cameras came out, well, a lot of people wanted to use these mirror-based units to shoot them. So what we have is a convex mirror here, and then the camera shoots down on the mirror, and the mirror shows the whole world, and the camera records sort of a donut shape. And then some special software unwraps the donut to make a full 360-degree view. The problem with these is that mirrors are nowhere near as optically precise as lenses, and of course you've only got as much detail as your digital sensor has. They've kind of fallen out of favor, but there's still a few specialized ones that work, and they're mostly used for video now. Because we've got affordable 4K video sensors, we can capture stitch-free video with these. However, things have changed with the introduction of Ricoh's Theta camera. It was sort of the first mass market panoramic camera that has been successful. So I just want to kick out here and I want to show you their original prototype. So the original Theta prototype. Let's go into our little sample panoramic cameras here. And there we go. Let me just make that full screen. So in 2013, Ricoh, which is basically Ricoh Pentax, because they took over Pentax, which is a historic camera brand, they proposed that they were going to make a one-shot panoramic camera, and they seeded the internet with this prototype picture, which looks a bit like the head of a hammerhead shark. But obviously what you're seeing here is a body with two cameras in it with fisheye lenses on both sides. And I thought, wow, this is going to be great when they make this. You know, hope it'll stitch. And obviously, it's going to be hard to put two cameras together in one box because you got to have the sensors. But that's what Ricoh prototyped. And before the end of 2013, they actually released a camera which looks exactly like this. And they no longer needed to make it look like a hammerhead shark. They managed to shrink the whole thing down. And these guys have done some brilliant optical engineering. And now they're in their 5th generation. This is now the Ricoh Theta V or 5. And soon to be available in Australia. I just got my hands on this demo unit yesterday. I've barely had a chance to look at it. But what makes the Ricoh unique, let me just get back to our slides here, is that it uses a folded optical path, which is truly remarkable. So the sensors in the Theta are not behind the lenses. The sensors are on the edge. And they're very small cell phone size sensors. So a little smaller than the tip of your baby fingernail. And there's a prism behind each lens to then fold the optical path to the left and right side of the camera, and that's how they put this to work. And we'll fire this thing up shortly. But I wanted to then talk about a couple other cameras, because everybody's entered the market. So Ricoh has done 5 versions of these things, and this is the newest. And its a big feature set now is 4K video. Everybody wants to get 4K video because panoramic video is taking over the market. People are putting huge investment dollars into this, and that's kind of like where the stills are moving to video, and it's all called virtual reality now. So a lot of companies have jumped into the market. We've seen Google enter it with a thing called the Google Jump. So it's a cluster of 16 GoPros. We've seen Facebook make a research camera. We've seen Samsung release their Gear 360 camera. We've seen Nokia generate this really crazy one. Let's bring up some of these pictures here. The Nokia one's quite interesting. So this is the Nokia. It's like a huge ball of cameras. It's about $50,000 US. They're hiring this thing out for movie use. Nikon's entered the market with their Key Mission 360. We've got, here's the Samsung. It's like a little golf ball sort of size thing. What else do we have here? There's quite a few. Oh, and of course, there's a lot of people who want to use clusters of GoPros. So this is the GoPro Omni. So again, you can put a cluster of individual cameras together, and GoPro makes this package, and there's 6 GoPros in it. That's enough to cover the full sphere, and they put special software into these Hero 4s so that they can all synchronize at the exact same time and record video truly synchronized. So these are the systems that people are using to produce all this crazy VR content that we're seeing. And of course now there's so many new cameras. I think basically I've got in my slide here, not a day goes by where there's not a new a crowdsourced camera, so Kickstarter, Indiegogo, all these things. There's just tons of new ones. And GoPro has now got a smaller, affordable one called the Fusion. I had a chance to see it and touch it, didn't play with it, at a GoPro launch event just this Monday. So I think we can expect to see GoPro's Fusion camera hit the streets in maybe early 2018. So there's a lot of money into this 360 game, and just everybody's trying to, you know, stake their claim in it. So let's, I'm going to put this one aside for a second here. What I want to do is show you how we can use this Ricoh Theta. So I'm really hoping I can get it linked up to my phone. Just before I started the seminar, I had to do a reset on my phone so that I could get it to show up on the screen over here. So now what I need to do is see if I can connect to the Theta. When I reset the phone, I seem to have disconnected my mobile provider, so I'll have to fix that later. But anyway, let's get in here. So we've turned the Theta on. The Theta operates as a little Wi-Fi hotspot. So let's hope that we can go find it here on our settings. So I'll get into Wi-Fi, and we should see the Theta over here. There it is there. Hopefully it remembers my password, which is really easy. The Theta just makes its own hotspot, and the numeric portion of its identification, i.e. the 3 zeros, 130, that's the password. So if somebody wanted to try to connect to it, you could. Anyway, so now let's go quickly over here. We'll run the Theta Pano app. It's kind of funny here. There's a little bit of an older version. The app is called Theta S, which was the previous model, but this is now the Theta V. So now we're going to connect to that. Let's go in here to camera settings. And now we want to allow, that's fine. And there we go. We now have, oh, hang on a sec here. Camera cannot connect to Wi-Fi. Oh, let me just go back to the Wi-Fi settings here. These are all problems because I just did this reset. Let's get it in there. Okay, that's connected. Okay. And let's get back here. I'll just put this on the table so I don't drop it. You have to be very careful with these panoramic cameras. They've got rather delicate lenses on them. There we are. Okay. Now I've got it set at a really long exposure. Let me get a reasonable ISO. It goes from ISO 64 all the way up to 3200. Let's get a shutter speed that's a little bit more normal here. And there we go. So now you can see, let me just bring the shutter speed down. We're really overexposed. Just kick out of that. So I am now looking at a live preview in here of what we're shooting at. Got auto white balance. Let's just take a picture really quickly. Just a little, you might have heard a little tick there. And now it's transferring the picture to my phone. And in a second, it should just pop up in my preview here. Give it a sec. And there we go. Here's the picture we just took. We can dynamically zoom around. I'm not about to say that's a very good exposure, but there it is. That's a one-shot panoramic camera. No stitching required, no assembly. You can shoot and share. As a matter of fact, I have flown in a helicopter with these Thetas with it sticking on the end of a carbon fiber pole, which is around here somewhere. Where's my carbon fiber pole? Did we put that in the closet? We might have put it in the closet. Not too sure. We'll pull it out later. Anyway, I got a 10-foot carbon fiber pole, and I've had the Theta below the helicopter's skids, and I have shot panoramas from a moving helicopter, pulled them into the camera roll, and published them while flying. So pretty amazing what you can do. To hang a digital SLR out of a helicopter and try to get a panorama while you're moving is almost impossible. So that's the Theta. They've got a great ecosystem of software on the iPhone and on Android to play with these things, and it even does video. It is a truly fun camera. Now, we've got some prints here. I'm just going to get Hashem to pass those around. This is actual output from the Ricoh Theta with a little bit of massage work in Lightroom. Honestly, maybe I'm getting just a little bit of improvement on it. And so that wide one is the full equirectangular image shot from the roof, or actually the sort of courtyard roof area of the Manchester Unity building on the corner of Collins and Swanston. And the square one is a stereographic or little planet projection of Luna Park in Melbourne. Both of these are shot with a very long carbon fiber pole, which is 10 meters. And that's what enables me to get this Theta into these truly unique points of view. And because it doesn't weigh much, I'm able to hold the pole at a distance. So let me just quickly show you how I did it. So let's go take a look here at the setup photos. And here's the Theta on a pole. So here I am on the roof of the Manchester Unity building. If we just flip on over to this, and you can see me holding the carbon fiber pole. It's very, very long. Everybody makes these jokes about my selfie stick with it. And that's me looking up. And you see the Theta is just the little guy on the top, and there's our results. So when you look at this image in a panoramic, I'll just go back here, in a panoramic viewer, and if anybody wants to see this in a VR headset, I can show it afterwards. It looks like you're floating above Swanston Street. It's truly incredible. I've even got some larger prints of this one on the wall downstairs by the imaging counter cache area. So you can see it. For a little toy camera, produces pretty good results. If you wanted to print these on canvases with our fine art printing department, which David at the back of the room runs, I have no doubt in my mind you could make a wall-size print with wallpaper or a big 1.5 meter by 1.5 meter stretched canvas print, and it would look brilliant out of the Theta. As a fine art print, you probably don't want to go much bigger than about 24 by 24 inches, because then you start to see a little bit of the pixelization. But the canvas always holds the size very well. So that's the Theta. But there's more cameras that are coming in this area. There's a Chinese company called Insta360, and I haven't even had a chance to play with it. But the distributor just brought it in the other day, and this one's just come out. And this is called the Insta360 One. This little guy can operate much like the Theta, handheld. It's got a shutter button on it, but it also has a little connector here. I don't know how you pull it out here. I gotta figure this out. You can press the button. Oh, there it is. I don't know if you can see this, but there's a little lightning connector. So this little guy just plugs right into an iPhone, and there's an Android version coming soon. But the other thing which is cool about the Insta360 One is it's got a little connector at the back here, and you can put a little eyelet and a string on it. It will shoot 4K video at 120 frames per second. I think it's 4K, maybe it's full HD. I haven't played with it yet, I'm dying to. I'll play with it on the weekend. But you swing it around your head and it does Matrix style bullet time videos. So that's their big. The whole idea of these panoramic cameras is to make photography fun. And I just find that they're just so crazy to play with. But this company's really making waves because they've got another camera here, which is the Insta360 Pro. Again, they just brought it in yesterday. I've turned it on, but I have no idea how to use it yet. But this is kind of like competing with that crazy Nokia camera that I've showed you. And this was in the news yesterday. This has now been certified to put on a vehicle and shoot Google Street View data. So it's pretty amazing. And this will do 4K video and 4K still panorama. So there's 6 little fisheye lenses in this thing, and obviously a bunch of electronics in here. So I'm itching to play with it on the weekend. You can come up and have a little touch. So, I mean, there's just so many different companies that are jumping on the 360 bandwagon. Very exciting time to be involved in panoramic photography. Now, let's get back to our slides here. So I've showed you lots of new things you can buy, and we're happy to sell them to you because we sell a lot of these things. The Insta360 line we've got, we sell the Ricoh Thetas, we've got the Nikon Key Mission, we've even got this little V360 mirror video camera, which is quite affordable. But maybe you want to just have a little bit of fun with panoramas with the gear you've already got. So, right off the bat, there's no hard and fast rules about panoramas. I mean, I sort of said, you know, they could be wide, they could be squared, they're kind of mosaics. It's whatever you really want to do. So as far as lens choice, well, you just choose your focal length. Choose what you're looking for. Are you trying to get that distant mountain and just get a little bit more data out of it? Shoot 4 or 5 frames across and you've got it. Now you've got the equivalent of maybe a 100 megapixel picture with 5 or 6 frames from your 24 megapixel Canon 5D Mark III, which is what I have. So you've effectively taken, if you're say at 200 mil and you're looking at that landscape of the mountains in the background and all that sort of stuff, if you're at 200 mil and you hold the camera vertically and then you shoot a few pictures across nice and level, try to do it level, that always helps, and you stitch that together, well now you've managed to get a picture as if you shot it with maybe an 80 mil lens, but you've got all the detail because you did shoot it at 200 mil. So shoot it with anything you've got. If it's landscapes you're shooting, you just don't need to worry about how you're going to hold your camera. Just make sure you got enough overlap to stitch it and you're going to be fine. When you start to getting into the wide angles and the spherical panoramas, that's when it gets a bit tricky because you're going to have objects near and far and parallax is going to start affecting you. And you can do that little simple parallax test. You just close one eye and then you close your other eye and you see that the relative position of the people who are in the front row here have just shifted a little left and right with respect to my 2 eyes. So that's what happens when the camera's not in the perfect spot for everything to line up. You can get some discontinuities in your stitching. So there's some tricks, and this is what I want to show you. It's called basically the plumb bob system. So I'm going to just grab a camera here. I'll just take this ADD off the panoramic head over here. And I'll grab a lens. This is just a standard 18 to 135 kit lens. So we're just going to put that on here. And let's just say we want to get a fairly wide angle shot. So I've come prepared. I have a little plumb bob, which is basically an elastic band, a string, and I duct taped a coin on the bottom of it. I think you could make this. It's pretty easy. All I'm going to do is I'm going to put that, I'm going to take my lens cap off. I'm going to put that over the front here. This is, be careful you don't want to get it all over your lens here. Just going to wrap that around the front. Now here's the magic little trick I'm going to tell you. It's the front of the lens, which is the magic point that you want to rotate the camera about. It's not the film plane, it's not the center of the lens, it's the glass. That's the magic point. So as long as you know the magic point of which to rotate your camera, you're good to go. And after you've done it with the plumb bob 10 or 20 times, you don't need the string anymore. You just get to know how it works. I quite often shoot panoramas with my camera over my head and I just rotate my body. I'll just kind of keep it over my noggin and it's good to go. Yeah, there'll be a few little niggly stitch errors, but it saves me bringing a tripod and a panoramic head while I'm on vacation if I want to get a few spheres. So basically, all I've got to do, it's kind of handy if you put something on the ground. I'll just toss my keys on the ground here. So you just throw something on the ground, and then you basically just let the string kind of get the vibration out, and there you do. As long as you hold the string touching the thing you put on the ground and you take a picture, I'll just turn the camera on here. Take a shot. Then you rotate. Now, if I was paying attention, I'd look at it. You rotate it a little bit. You could have it in live view, or you could look through the viewfinder. Rotate it. I like to turn the grid lines on in my live view display, and I rotate it just enough less one grid line. So I got a whole grid line of overlap, about 25% works well. So then you just bring it here again, let it subside. Take the next shot, and then take the next shot. You keep going. You can do the whole circle. You can do multiple rows. It'll just assemble like butter. So that's the trick. Make yourself a little plumb bob up and have fun. You can use it. You can tape it to your iPhone and do it. Of course, all those other cameras have got those built-in panoramic modes. There's a few other little tricks to do it. You know, you might want to have it in manual exposure. You might want to lock your white balance. You might want to lock your focus. You might want to shoot a raw file. But really, at the end of the day, if you can take the pictures, it's going to work. The modern software is just so good at putting all this stuff together. So that is a classic little trick. And I've done this tons of times. When I travel, honestly, I don't like dragging a tripod around with me. It's really nice to be able to shoot panoramas and be able to build these full spheres for my virtual worlds without having all the heavy gear. So, you know, that's quite easy. The other thing which is nice to remember, and I should have just said this a little earlier, when you're shooting simple handheld panoramas, it's just that landscape, you go tick, tick, tick. Nice little trick is hold the camera vertically or in portrait mode, because simple panorama is just one row. Well, why not buy yourself a little extra vertical field of view? Because when your lens is held this way, this is the short axis, this is the long axis. But we're doing a panorama. We get it as wide or as long as we want. So why not just hold it vertically? Saves us doing 2 rows. You could do 2 rows, you could do 3. I've done like 4 rows handheld. It gets a little complex and there's a chance you might miss a frame. So the old standard, nice 1 row, keep it level. It'll stitch like butter in Photoshop or Lightroom. Really easy. Back in the old days, you needed special software, but now Photoshop and Lightroom pretty well do most of the stuff you need. So, maybe you want to get a little bit more complex. Maybe you want to shoot longer exposures. This is where the panoramic head comes into play. So, let's talk about the ring style panoramic head, which is this one here. So, I'll bring this up in front here. They call it a ring style because the panoramic head mounts to the lens. So you see this little guy here? There's a ring which is capturing this fisheye lens. Now this is the Canon 8 to 15 mm fisheye zoom. Very nice lens, highly recommend it. Been using it for years. Bought it at Michael's, I might add. So let's pop our camera on here. And I'll just make sure that this is lined up so it's vertically here. So I'll just turn this on. I'll get it into live view mode here. So we're at 8 millimeters here. Make sure we don't fall it off. And you can see we are seeing all the way up to the roof, and we are seeing all the way down to the ground here. Not a very good exposure or anything. But with this 8 mm fisheye on a standard affordable Nikon or Canon entry-level camera, any of the ones, even the 200D or was it D200? I can't remember the model numbers. All you need is 4 shots, so you just shoot at 90-degree intervals. You just rotate this guy around. I don't have my click stop set exactly at 90, I'll just do that. There's a little plunger here on the ring style panoramic head to set your settings. I'll set it for 90 degrees. And everybody can come up here and have a little look at this after I'm done. I have a little touch and feel. Let me just get that screwed in here. So basically, there's 90 degrees, rotate it again, it clicks, 90 degrees, rotate it, clicks, clicks, and there you go. 4 shots at 8 mm on an affordable camera is everything you need for the complete sphere to be captured. Now here's the one little letdown. Photoshop and Lightroom don't stitch fisheye lenses very well. It's not going to work. You will need some stitching software. There's a free solution called Hug-In, and then there's some paid solutions. The one I like to use is called PT GUI. So that's the ring style panoramic head. Very easy. There's literally tens of thousands of photographers run around the world using these style panoramic heads, shooting Google Street View, because Google opened up their platform for anyone to publish, and that's what they wanted you to use. Now, there is let's go back to our slides here, the fully adjustable panoramic head. So let's get that guy out here. So here's one of them. Now, we'll just move over. Now, this one is a bit more complex, and it's what you use to shoot multiple row panoramas. So let's very quickly get this camera off here. We'll put our lens back on. So if all you want to shoot is simple spheres and make little planets like that, that's all you need, one of these ring style heads. They're very nice. So let's put this down here. Now, so to use the fully adjustable panoramic head, we're mounting the camera to it, so I'll just get it in here. This thing uses all Arca Swiss plates. And as you see, I've got the camera somewhat mounted on the back, because as I was telling you, it's the front of the lens is the no parallax point. Now I've just eyeballed it in here. You kind of want to get it to millimeter accuracy to get your best panoramic stitches, specifically if you're shooting indoors. A millimeter error on either of these axes will be noticeable in an indoor panorama of a room. Outdoor landscapes, you'd never notice. You could be out by several centimeters, you'd never know. But that's how this works. So you have an axis here, so you can do multiple rows. Just adjust your overlap so you get enough for stitching. And you've got on the rotator down here a whole slew of settings so that you can have, well, there's like probably 16 different click stops so that you can adjust your overlap. And you just feel it. It's very easy to use. So that's the fully adjustable panoramic head. And lastly, let me just get this out of the way. There are robotic pano heads. So let me just show you a quick little slide of what some of these robotic pano heads look like. So let's make that full screen here. People like the robotic panorama heads to make gigapixel resolution panoramas. There's a lot of advantages to them. They work automatically. You just sort of set it, program it, and let it shoot. Peter Michael, our managing director here at Michael's Camera, has one of the Gigapan brand robotic pano heads, which is, where is it in the picture here? It's kind of like this one here. And he's been using it. I don't know if he used it on this panorama that we have behind us on the wall here or not. I personally like the high resolution, fully adjustable one like I just showed you, because I find it very important to choose the time when I take each frame, because there might be moving things happening in the scene. If it's a robotic head, it kind of just takes frames whenever you want, and you might have cars passing across boundaries, people in the image 16 times because they're walking and the panoramic head is just tracking them. But there's a lot of reasons to use them, and if you need to shoot 1,000 pictures to build a mosaic, you might want the robotic head. I've done some 1,000 frame panoramas by hand. I can do about 1,000 frames in an hour shooting these things. So those are the sort of panoramic heads. So now let's get back to our slides. So, how do we assemble a panorama? Well, right off the bat, if a camera or our phone that we're shooting our little sweet panoramas doesn't do it, we're going to need software. As I said earlier, Photoshop and Lightroom have some tools built in these days, including Photoshop Elements. By the way, if you notice the photo news today, Photoshop Elements, new version was just announced, so that's your sort of Photoshop on the cheap. I think the prices were $80 US or something for the license, so that's quite exciting. Lots of new features in that. Basically, Photoshop Elements has got almost everything the enthusiast photographer needs without all the expense or the subscription model of Photoshop Creative Cloud. So let me just do a quick, unfortunately I don't have any of the software running on this little presentation laptop, but I took a couple of screen grabs before I came in today, and I just want to show you a simple panoramic project. So here we have, this is a really simple series of photos. All it is me taking pictures out of the car window while I was in Canada on a trip to see my family a few years ago. So you see I've held the camera vertically and I'm just sweeping from left to right. You can do right to left, but I tend to go left to right. I don't know why. Maybe it's because that's the direction English-speaking people read. So there's the pictures. It's just a farmer's field. We've got some big circular hay bales out there drying in the field, and I want to assemble that. So I've brought the, and I've even got my hand in the mirror there, you can see in the side window, so we'll probably want to crop that out later. So what I've done, I've opened all 6 frames in Photoshop, and I've gone and I've run the Photoshop Photo Merge command, and I've just said use auto, use all open files. I think I said correct for blend images together, vignetting correction. Hey, all the defaults are fine. And you just do this, and lo and behold, there it is. It spits it out. And because it's handheld, you know, you move your hands a little wee bit, your sky's a little high on the one side, a little low on the other side. If we just go back to that slide, it's even used content-aware fill to add some extra grass and some extra sky where I had no content. And now I could then recrop into this, and I could possibly clone out that mirror. It's just grass over there. But there you go. That was no panoramic head used. That's just me hanging out the car window taking a picture of a farmer's field I kind of liked. Photoshop and Lightroom assemble that like butter. Not a problem at all. So back to our slides here. How are we doing on time? Well, we're really running a bit late. I'm going to have to go quick. There are specialized applications for when things get tricky. Tricky is making little planets and spherical panoramas. You're going to need software to do that. The free application Hugin can do it. It's a little hard to use. I like to use PT GUI. It's $150 Australian or something. Great program, been using it for 15 years. There's another program called Color Auto Pano. It's also quite popular. I just find that the results I get with PT GUI are a bit better. Let's quickly go through our commercial uses. Obviously, panoramic tours, virtual tours. If you've ever used Google Street View, you're using a virtual tour. You're moving around the streets in a virtual environment with those cameras that have been on the top of the Google cars for years. Google's created more panoramas than everyone else combined, thanks to Street View. There's now Street View Mobile. You can talk to your Ricoh Theta to it and publish directly to the Google platform. If anybody wants to hang around a little afterwards, I will happy to show you the Street View app. I know that some people have to leave because it is lunchtime. I apologize for running a little bit late. Then, of course, there are custom virtual tours that are produced with software such as Colors, Pano Tour Pro, and Garden Gnome software. Those are the two main companies. I use the Color app. Color was recently purchased by GoPro because it's such a big market, and they had video stitching software. So video is where a lot of the money is going. So let's just quickly show you a virtual tour that's been put together in the Pano Tour Pro app. So let's click over to Safari. I want to go over to here, and let's make this full screen. And here we have is a panorama. I'm sort of killing two birds with one stone because we're running late. So this is a panorama that's been shot from a drone, which of course gets really exciting. And we're running it in a virtual tour here from Pano Tour Pro. We can go up and down, look at the sky. We can look straight down. We can zoom in and we can zoom out. And of course, we can even have a bit of fun here. And we can look at this in little planet view. And if you've looked at what I've been doing over here with my print on the side, we'll zoom in a little bit. Oh, let's zoom in. There we go. We'll zoom in. And you see that it's all interactive. So you can go around and you can look inside things. This is an actual commercial job that I did for a bicycle store that is for sale. So not only did the client want to have his bike store photograph, oh, hang on a sec, sorry. He wanted the interior of the bike store, so here's a standard panorama in the interior of the bike store, shot with that fisheye lens. He wanted to show where the store was located in Port Melbourne to prospective buyers. Because, hey, maybe you want to buy a business that's in Port Melbourne where there's a lot of high-end apartment buildings where people buy carbon fiber bikes. So that's how that worked. We go back, and there was two aerial panos. One was shot from the beach. The little arrow there is a little graphic overlay I threw into it to show where the store is located. And there was another panorama taken from a park off the shopping district. Again, you need to fly over unpopulated areas with your drone. But here's a drone. Drone's got a camera. Drone sits in the air, and it sort of is almost locked there in the air thanks to GPS. Rotate the drone, tilt the camera up and down, shoot enough frames, you got yourself a panorama. It's great fun. I'm addicted to it. Just absolutely love shooting panoramas from my drone. And because the drone doesn't have a fisheye lens, you got to shoot a few more images, but you get a high resolution result. I currently fly the Phantom 4 Pro. It's got a 20 meg sensor and a 24 mil effective focal length. Gives me a resulting panorama size 252 megapixels. So that's quite cool. Yes, there we go. So panoramic tours, virtual tourism. Wow, I mean, people want to see what other places look. We've been doing our virtual tourism through Google Street View for years. But of course now we can take video in these locations and we can watch them in our VR headsets. So we have these electronic displays in here. This one is a cheap one. You just put a cell phone in here and you put it on your eyes and you can see the world and you can shoot video with a Theta and interact with it with a headset. Really exciting stuff. So the whole world of virtual tourism is just, you know, it's going crazy. There's people who shoot huge high-resolution gigapans from city towers and the like. Very popular in Europe. All sorts of them. All try to break gigapixel record sizes. Done pictures way bigger than I've ever shot. And of course, as I just said, modern GPS-located drones have enabled affordable high-resolution panoramic photography from the air. The DJI company's been, they recently acquired Hasselblad. So they're now making big drones that carry 100 megapixel medium format cameras. There's no need to fly conventional aircraft to shoot aerial photos. Imagine the panos I'd be able to shoot with a 100 megapixel medium format camera on a drone. I can't wait to get one. Environmental training. People are using 360-degree stills and video to show people training material in hazardous environments without taking them to those hazardous environments. Qantas has been producing a whole bunch of training material that a colleague of mine's been shooting for baggage handlers. So they're just using it in induction. They can show all of the potential threat assessment without, you know, having a threat at all. So really, it's really interesting. There's all sorts of transportation applications for this. You know, we can show the virtual scene around a moving vehicle for simulators. And of course, they use panoramas in virtual worlds for video games. Social tagging. It's not as popular now as it was a couple years ago, but there was a lot of companies that were shooting these huge stadium panoramas, very high resolution, and they were getting like a beverage company to sponsor it, and you could zoom in and find your face in the crowd, identify it, and tag it on Facebook, and the whole thing would go viral. So a few of these things have been done in Australia. They did a lot of cricket matches. They've done some AFL games. There's been a few concerts. There was some real famous ones done on the U2 tour a few years ago. So it was quite popular. I did a test case on one of these a few years ago at a concert in the Yarra Valley at a winery. So it's good fun. It might have gone out of fashion now. I'm not seeing it as much as I was 2 or 3 years ago. Lastly, panoramic printing. Well, I love printing. There's one of the things that we say here at Michaels, it's not real until you get it on paper. We want to see your stuff printed. We're happy to help you. And there's just this immense amount of pleasure when you see your digital works come to life on your wall. And of course, that's why we've got pictures all over the wall here at Michaels, and including panoramas. This wall behind me is a Barcelona panorama that our managing director, Peter Michael, shot. Over here, where Alwyn's standing at the back, there's a panorama of a city pub. You can even find a stitching error in it if you want to. It's around Alwyn's leg. You can take a look. There's a foot that's kind of disconnected over there, I believe. So the panoramic printing's great. You can make these crazy little planets. You can shoot such high-res pictures that you can go really, really large. You can wrap a room in a picture. You've got so much detail. And we can do it for you with digital wallpaper here that we print. So the panorama is your friend when you need more pixels. The little Theta shoots a 14 megapixel pano. You know, you've seen the results on the prints I just handed around. You go on a wall, it'll be a bit pixelated. But maybe you want to really wow someone. You get right in, your face a foot away from a wall print with hundreds and hundreds of megapixels of detail. We can take care of you, and we can wrap a wall. So there you go. That's kind of, going wide, a little primer. I've covered a lot of things. I ran a little bit late. I apologize. But now I'm happy to take some questions, and anybody wants to hang out longer and talk to me, got lots of stuff to show up here. Plenty of things that we didn't show. I can even demonstrate some software on the computer on the back. Apologize for the odd technical glitch here, but I hope that my excitement of panoramas wears off on you and shows. It was my little area that I was good at it. I'm not much of an artist, but I'm pretty good at assembling panoramas. Anyway, if anybody's got a question, I think we've got a handheld microphone somewhere around here because we are broadcasting. We'd like to get the questions. Oh, Daffod with the cap in the back of the room will come to you. So if you got a question, feed it to me. There's a young lady in the back.
Okay, this is a little bit of a random question. You'll probably get more appropriate ones, I'm sure. But do you know of the David Copperfield Statue of Liberty illusion, where he made the Statue of Liberty disappear through rotating a platform?
I have no idea how he did that, but I remember seeing it in a television show. I can't remember what show I watched.
This American Life has a podcast about it. But my question is, what is the worst thing you've done that just looked hilarious in a...
Oh my God.
Yeah, because I've done some bad ones.
I will definitely put it as a link into this broadcast when it goes up on YouTube, but I have made mistakes in stitching panoramas many times. The software is better and better today than it ever was, but say 4 or 5 years ago, putting together these spheres had been difficult. And I had a sphere that I shot in front of that really big sculpture on the South Bank side across from Crown Towers. There's a big sculpture, looks like arms out, really, really tall. I don't know what it's called, but anyway, I shot a panorama in front of it, and it was shot on a Canon 7D with a 15mm fisheye in a 8-column by 3-row grid configuration. So a lot of pictures in it, and in high dynamic range. Excuse me, losing my breath here. And when I went to assemble it, there was some screw up, and I ended up with this assembly that all the pictures had white around it, and I had the little frames were like petals of a flower. And I have no idea how I did it. I never was able to repeat it, and I'm not 100% certain if I saved the project file, but I did render it out, and it looks like a flower. So it was a happy mistake. I also did another panorama with a really, really ugly HDR, like so over the top, it was like Trey Radcliffe on LSD. And if anybody knows who's Trey Radcliffe, he does some of the ugliest HDR you've ever seen. Makes a lot of money. He's better at it than me, I guess so. But anyway, overblown HDR. I can't stand it. I said it. Anyway, I did it on this Panorama, and it was in this weird store in Fitzroy that sold Mexican trinkets or something. Really weird place called Locora de Mora. I don't know what it was called. Anyway, the thing assembled with errors all over the place, and it looked like a Picasso Cubist painting. And again, I don't know what caused the stitching error, but it was really cool, and I kept it, and I published it. So yeah, mistakes slip in all the time. And needless to say, when you're shooting panoramic mosaics, you have a very high potential of error because you cannot control what happens in the scene. As I was talking about temporal distortion, time-based distortion, you want to shoot panoramas with mosaics and there's waves rolling in, you're never going to get the waves to line up. You're going to have to Photoshop the hell out of that thing later to make the waves look good. So you got to kind of time it. When you shoot panoramas in crowds of people, it's so difficult because they're moving all over the place. It's going to be very hard to deliver one that doesn't have people all over the place or you're cutting off their legs. So I've got this one, and I'll bring it up. Let me see if I don't know if I could find it here. Problem is I'm actually doing the seminar from a computer that's not mine. Mine's running the live broadcast back there. I'll just describe it, and I'll put a link into the eventual broadcast. It was a Times Square, New York City panorama. It's got about 150 images in it, and it literally took me 40 hours to assemble it. An obscene amount of effort, and it used to be displayed on the wall here at Michael's, and I was looking for the print, and I don't know where the print went. I'm getting the time thing. We're sort of running a little bit late. But anyway, huge amount of effort. It wouldn't have worked without all that labor, so it's nice. So should we cut it now, or should we take any more questions? What do you feel? If anybody's happy to stay, I'm happy to answer more questions. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Daniel. Thank you so far for your insights. The question I have is, most of the professionals in photography that I listen to, they talk about Photoshop as the preferred software of choice. I'm nothing more than an enthusiast or a hobbyist when it comes to dabbling in photography. And I find Photoshop a bit technically cumbersome and also a little bit on the dear side to buy that software to use just on the odd occasion. Is there any alternative software that we could use, given today's, most of today's photography is done on a digital platform, making it a lot easier to manipulate and play with the image?
Well, most computers now come with some very basic photo editing software. So if you use an Apple computer by chance, just the Photos app's got very basic things. I mean, the classic thing people need to do is crop an image, rotate it to fix a skewy horizon, and maybe increase the saturation or the exposure. And those things exist in almost every simple application. There's quite a few public domain ones. I'm trying to think, there was one a client suggested to me the other day that's open source. It was kind of like Adobe's Lightroom, but so there is an awful lot that's free. What you are saying we get all the time. Photoshop is a sledgehammer of an application. There's so much in it. So Photoshop's Elements is a lot simpler, and then after that you go down to some of these simple free tools. I'll put some links to some of these applications into the YouTube video, so look for that on the Michael's channel. But if you're a Mac user, just try the Photos app. And of course, even on your iPhone, there's an awful lot of little free applications. I'm sure Android phones would have it. I use Apple stuff. But there's so many just simple applications. You just move a few little finger gestures and you can clean it up. Most people do not need what Photoshop does. As a matter of fact, I don't use a lot of Photoshop in my work. Yes, at the final fine-tuning, I use mostly Adobe Lightroom, which is it's called a workflow system. And that does the raw file conversions. Photoshop is only for the fine-tuning. I am definitely, by no stretch of imagination, am I a Photoshop expert. I'm pretty good at stitching, though. But anyway, very good question. And I know a lot of people struggle with Photoshop. As a matter of fact, Alwyn is about to start his new course in Photoshop Elements, so we're going to have that here at Michael's. Much more friendly program, very affordable. Any other questions? Okay, well, we'll end the broadcast. I'm happy to hang out a little bit longer. I'm sorry I've kept you people a little longer than our allotted lunchtime. But if you want to come up and see some of this stuff, we'll turn the lights on. Happy to give you some demonstrations. You can pick my brain in private. Okay, take care. Thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Thanks to our Facebook viewers. Hope there was a few. I don't really know. We'll probably have to answer a few questions on that feed. And on the Michaels YouTube channel, this broadcast will be repeated. Give me a day or two to put it online. Hopefully it all worked out well. And we had a great turnout. Hopefully you got a little bit of the panoramic kick. Get in touch with me. I'm easy to find. I'm always here 5 days a week. If you got questions, always happy to help. Take care. We'll see you next time.